My son's French fiancée called me an ugly cow in her native language, thinking I couldn't understand. I smiled politely and poured her another glass of wine. 3 hours later, I casually leaned over to her parents and said, "Immigration would be very interested in what we just discussed." She nearly dropped her fork. But let me back up and tell you how this all started. If you're watching this, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell for more real-life revenge stories. And tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's dive into how my so-called future daughter-in-law tried to humiliate me and how karma came back faster than she ever expected. When my son first introduced me to Claire, I wanted to like her. Truly, I did. My son, David, is my only child, and after years of worrying about him finding the right partner, I was relieved that he'd finally brought someone home. She was beautiful, well-spoken, and carried herself like someone who belonged in glossy magazines. At first glance, I thought she might be the one who could finally make him happy. But as the saying goes, beauty is only skin deep. From the very beginning, there was something off about Claire. She had this way of speaking to people that wasn't outright rude, but laced with subtle digs that left you second-guessing yourself. At first, I brushed it off as cultural differences. After all, she was French, and sometimes bluntness can be mistaken for cruelty, or so I told myself. The first time she came over for dinner, she looked around my modest home and wrinkled her nose ever so slightly. "Oh," she said, her accent thick, but her English perfect. "It's cozy." That one word, the way she drew it out, made me feel like I was offering her a shack instead of a warm, loving home.
David, bless his heart, didn't notice. He was too busy staring at her like she hung the moon. I smiled, played the gracious hostess, and tucked the sting of her words deep inside. But that was just the beginning. As weeks went by, her comments grew bolder. She'd joke about my old-fashioned cooking, roll her eyes when I brought up traditions, and once even told David that I was a bit too involved in his life. That one hit harder than the others, because I knew it wasn't true. I had worked so hard to give him independence, to let him grow into his own man. Still, I stayed quiet. I loved my son, and if this woman made him happy, I would endure the little slights. That's what mothers do, isn't it? But then came that dinner, the one that changed everything. It was a Saturday evening, and David had invited both families over to celebrate their engagement. Claire's parents were visiting from Paris, and I was determined to make the night perfect. I spent the whole day in the kitchen, roasting, baking, simmering. The house smelled of garlic, rosemary, and love. I wanted them to feel welcome, to see the best of who I was. When they arrived, Claire swept in like royalty, her parents trailing behind with polite smiles. They were kind enough, but Claire, she was in rare form that night. Every comment was sharper, every look colder. Still, I carried on with grace. I poured wine, I served plates, I smiled until my cheeks ached. I refused to let her see that she was getting under my skin. Then, halfway through the meal, it happened. I was refilling glasses when I heard her say it, in rapid French, low enough she thought no one else would catch it. "Regardez-la, cette vache laide." Look at her, that ugly cow. Her parents chuckled uncomfortably. My son didn't notice, lost in conversation. But me, my blood ran cold. You see, what Claire didn't know was that I studied French for years in college. I wasn't fluent, but I understood enough. And in that moment, every ounce of patience, every forced smile, every swallowed insult came crashing down.
I wanted to slap her, to throw her out of my house, to scream at my son for not seeing through her mask. But instead, I smiled. I calmly set the bottle of wine down, looked her right in the eye, and said in perfect French,
Encore du vin? More wine? The color drained from her face. She stammered something, trying to laugh it off, but the damage was already done. I played it cool the rest of the evening, chatting pleasantly, laughing when appropriate, all the while planning my revenge. Because if Claire wanted to treat me like a fool, she was about to learn just how sharp this ugly cow could be, and the opportunity came faster than I could have dreamed. That's where we leave part 1, setting the stage, building tension, and making the audience desperate to know how the ugly cow would strike back.
The room felt smaller after I spoke French. For a few stunned seconds, the hum of forks and low conversation slowed, like the air itself had heard and paused. Claire's hand, mid-air, trembled. Her smile flickered. Her parents exchanged looks that were suddenly more guarded than genial. My son's face shifted from bliss to confusion as he turned to me. "Mom, you speak French?" His voice carried too much hope, as if language could bridge the distance he'd let grow between us. "A little," I said, placing the wine bottle back on the table with deliberate calm. "Enough to know when I'm being insulted." There it was in the room, a tiny rip of truth. Claire's color washed out like paint in the rain. She tried to laugh, a high, brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I was joking," she stammered, but the air no longer let the lie stay. I could have made a scene. I could have thrown her coat across the room and demanded she leave. I could have screamed until my voice cracked. But revenge, I knew by then, was a slow art. The best retribution is surgical, precise, composed, inevitable. So I put on my hostess smile and continued the evening as if nothing had happened. I asked her father about his work. I complimented a family photograph on the mantel. I passed the cheese plate. I poured myself a glass of wine and let the warmth settle into my chest like a promise. After the guests left, the house sighed and the lights dimmed to a soft glow. I cleaned the dishes with hands that didn't tremble, only moved with purpose. The insult rolled over and over in my mind, but alongside it, a plan took shape, not violent, but unavoidable. Claire had shown me how she thought: manipulation, public humiliation, hiding cruelty behind charm. If she used language and culture to belittle me, I would use law and truth to unmask her. First step: evidence. People who manipulate live in narrative, not in facts. Hide the facts, and the narrative holds. Reveal the facts, and the house of cards collapses. I needed more than my memory of those French words. I needed proof of her pattern. The snide comments to friends, the attempts to isolate my son, the casual cruelty. Over the next week, I moved like a woman with nothing to prove, cooking, calling the florist for the roses I kept on my table, pretending nothing had happened. But inside, I was building a quiet network. I reached out to the neighbor who often ran errands for Claire when she claimed to be too busy. I had tea with Mrs. Patel from across the street, who had always been generous with gossip. I listened more than I spoke. I let stories spill, small things that, when strung together, formed a necklace of patterns. Mrs. Patel rolled her eyes when I asked, then leaned forward. "She bragged to me last week," she said low. "Said your cooking is fine for a little while, until the baby comes and we have nursery rules." The words fell like bricks. It was petty, but petty turned dangerous when left unchecked. When cruelty compounds, it becomes a stain you can't scrub. I also spoke to the housekeeper, a shy woman who had been with me for years. She hesitated at first. Employees fear being pulled into family fights. But when I reminded her gently that truth matters more than fear, she opened up. She throws things, the housekeeper whispered. She criticizes everything I do in front of people. She takes the good china out and says it's old-fashioned. Last month, she said your recipes are for peasants. The housekeeper's eyes filled. I gave her a cup of tea and a quiet thank you. Tears can lubricate courage, and courage was a resource I needed. I also documented the small humiliations in my own handwriting, dates, quotes, circumstances. It sounds silly to some, but when you go to court or make a case with a family, a neat stack of notes is worth more than one shouted memory. Each entry crimsoned the ledger of intent. When future voices deny or deflect, paper remembers. Then came the opportunity I'd been waiting for: money. Claire's behavior wasn't limited to insults. Within months of their engagement, she began to insinuate herself into financial planning. At first, it was harmless, asking if she could help with the garden, offering to organize some of my papers. Later, it became a thirst. "Have you updated your will?" she asked once over coffee with a smile like a guillotine. "You should probably make sure everything is in order. It would be terrible if anything happened." The moment she used my age and possible infirmity as leverage in conversation, I felt the cold click into place. She was not a tenant of our household. She was a strategist, and strategists have a fatal flaw. They underestimate the quiet ones. So I moved the next piece into place. I called my lawyer, an older woman named Elise, who had been my friend for 20 years. Elise listened, then asked the right calm questions. Did I have updated documents? Were my accounts secure? Who had access? The legal language was careful, but I heard the hinge open. The possibility to create a wall between Claire's reach and my estate. "Elise," I said softly, "I don't want to fight. I want protection. I paused because the words were heavy with what they implied. I want to make sure no one can use my name to control my life." Within days, we arranged a discreet appointment. Elise suggested we set up a trust, move key accounts into dual signature access, and crucially, ensure the will reflected my current intentions, without giving anyone immediate power. Once established, it's difficult to touch. You can still be generous, but on your terms. The word terms hummed with joy. Terms mean control. As the legal paperwork began to be prepared, I continued the softer work. I sharpened my French again, not for vengeance, but for clarity. I started writing down phrases I heard, cataloging everyday cruelty, and I recorded them when I could. If Claire wanted to play the culture card, I would make culture my ally. Fluency, context, and a subtle depth of knowledge that would make her arrogance look juvenile. Then one Thursday evening, Claire slipped up in a way that widened a fissure I could drive a truck through. She'd invited a group of friends for a girls' night, and while laughing over cocktails, one of them started an ill-timed brag about having friends in immigration. Claire's laugh was bright, and her comment edged my way. "Well, if anyone had to go, you'd want them to have papers, right?" There it was, careless speculation about people's status. It was the kind of offhand comment that can shred reputations when placed in context. I let the remark settle like a seed. Later, when I played it back to my lawyer, Elise's eyes narrowed. She said, "This is useful, not for threats, but as evidence of a pattern of manipulative, demeaning behavior connected to perceived vulnerabilities." My revenge had evolved into something larger than pride. It was now a shield. I wasn't looking to humiliate for sport. I was aiming to protect the legacy I had carved for myself and to reveal a pattern that could harm the son I loved. The plan was clinical now, disciplined, the kind of thing built by women who had been underestimated and then decided they would not be walked over again. And so I waited. I cooked, I smiled, I listened. All the while the calendar pages turned, and the quiet network I'd started became a lattice, solid, silent, impossible to ignore. When it was time to act, it wouldn't be a scream, it would be a revelation. A clear, undeniable lesson delivered without malice, only truth. The strange thing about revenge is how quiet it feels in the middle. People imagine fury, fireworks, screaming confrontations. But the truth? The most effective revenge is patient, almost serene. And by then, I had become serene. Weeks passed since that dinner, where Claire's mask slipped. I watched her closely, like a cat watching a mouse in the grass. The mouse scurries, confident it cannot be seen. The cat simply waits. My son, David, meanwhile remained enchanted. Love is a strong anesthetic. It numbs men to the truth. He defended her without realizing. When I mentioned that Claire sometimes said unkind things, his brow wrinkled. "Mom, she jokes differently. She's European, you know. The humor is sharper." "Sharper," I echoed, my smile calm. I let him believe his defense worked. He thought he'd persuaded me. What he didn't know was that I had no interest in persuading him. I was gathering. And soon the gathering would become undeniable. One evening, David stopped by unexpectedly. I was at the dining table, my journal open. He leaned down to kiss my cheek, then frowned. "What are you writing?" "Memories," I said lightly, closing the book. "A woman my age should write things down. Otherwise, people forget what's true." He shrugged, poured himself water, and didn't press. That was good. That was necessary. One day, he would see those words not as idle musings, but as testimony. Claire, emboldened by David's blind devotion, grew careless. She began to let small slivers of contempt slip even in English. "You know," she said one afternoon while I folded laundry, "you should think about a retirement home. These big houses are too much for older women. Don't you agree, David?" My son chuckled nervously, glancing at me. "She's joking, Mom." "Of course," I said softly, smoothing a shirt. But my pen remembered the exact date, time, and words that night. What she failed to understand was that every insult, every attempt to diminish me was a brick in the wall she was building against herself. I wasn't fighting her. I was simply collecting the bricks she handed me and stacking them neatly into evidence. Then came the conversation that shifted everything. I had invited David for dinner, just the two of us. Candlelight, roast chicken, a bottle of red wine. For an hour we ate and talked about ordinary things. His work, his favorite football team, the changing seasons. He relaxed, and in that relaxation, I planted a seed. "David," I said gently, "do you remember when you were 12 and that boy at school mocked you for your accent? You came home furious. You swore you'd never forgive him." David laughed faintly. "Yeah, I even cried about it. I was so sensitive back then." "You weren't sensitive," I corrected. "You were human. Words matter. They cut. And sometimes they reveal who someone truly is." He grew quiet, studying me. "Mom, is this about Claire again?" I met his gaze. "She called me a cow, David, in her language. She thought I didn't understand. What if she calls you something worse one day? What if she mocks our family, our values, when you're not looking?" His jaw tensed. For the first time, doubt flickered across his features. He wanted to defend her, but the memory of that boy at school, it had struck the core of him. He excused himself to the restroom, and I knew I'd left a mark. Meanwhile, Elise, my lawyer, finalized the paperwork. My will, trust, and accounts were sealed. Claire could smile all she wanted, but the vault was locked. "You've built a fortress," Elise said during our final meeting. "If she tries to manipulate, she'll hit a wall of steel." "Good," I said, "but I don't just want protection. I want exposure. I want David to see her clearly without me lifting a finger." Elise nodded. "Then you need her to reveal herself, and she will, because arrogance always does." The opportunity came sooner than expected. Claire decided to host a dinner party at their apartment. She invited friends, colleagues, even her own parents. I was included, though I knew she would have preferred to exclude me. Perhaps she wanted to parade me as her project, the aging mother-in-law she tolerated. I arrived with a bottle of wine and a smile. She looked at me with tight lips. "You didn't have to bring anything," she said pointedly, her French accent curling the words. "I know," I replied softly, "but I wanted to." The evening was polished, at first. Laughter, clinking glasses, talk of travels. Then one of her friends, a woman with too much perfume, asked me in French where I had learned the language. "From my grandmother," I answered fluently, swirling the wine in my glass. "She always told me, language is power. Learn what others don't want you to understand." The table grew still. Claire flushed. I watched her lips part, ready to deny, ready to charm, but her parents looked at me differently now, eyes narrowing, wheels turning. And then Claire made her fatal mistake. She laughed, a sharp, unkind sound, and said, still in French, "Well, perhaps your grandmother should have taught you to dress better, too." The words hung in the air like smoke. The friend's perfume couldn't hide the stench of cruelty. This time, there was no pretending it was a joke, not when I responded instantly in perfect French with a toast. "To grandmothers who teach us to see wolves hiding in silk dresses." The room erupted, not with laughter, but with silence sharp as glass. David's fork clattered to his plate. He had understood, not the language, but the malice. After that night, Claire's mask began to slip faster. She grew more irritable, more controlling. David came to me the following week, his voice uncertain. "Mom, maybe you were right. She's different when it's just us. She criticizes everything. She says I'm not ambitious enough, that I embarrass her." I placed a hand on his. "Love should lift you, David, not strip you down." His eyes filled with confusion and hurt. The seed of doubt had blossomed. I knew then that the climax was near. Claire was cornered, though she didn't really realize it yet. Her arrogance, her cruelty, her hunger for control were unraveling before everyone's eyes. All I had to do was wait for the final, undeniable act that would tear her mask completely away. And when it came, I would not need to shout. The truth would expose her louder than any voice ever could.
There's an old saying my grandmother used to whisper, "Give someone enough rope and they'll hang themselves." I never fully understood it until I met Claire. By this point, her mask was slipping daily. She had grown bold, reckless even. Perhaps she thought my silence meant defeat. Perhaps she mistook kindness for weakness. But really, silence is just the sound of someone sharpening their knife. It started with little things. Snide remarks, exaggerated sighs whenever I walked into a room, rolling her eyes at my son when she thought I wasn't looking. But then came the storm. David invited me to brunch one Sunday. It was meant to be a family gathering, just the three of us. I brought a basket of croissants, still warm from the bakery, wrapped neatly in linen. When I placed them on the table, she sneered, "Oh, store-bought again. Don't you ever bake? Or is that too much work at your age?"
The words stung, but not for me. I had armor now. They stung for David, who looked down at his plate, ashamed. "Claire," he said softly, "that's not fair." She shrugged. "I'm just saying, a woman should know how to keep appearances, but maybe in her generation, they didn't bother." I smiled faintly, sipping my tea. "Appearances fade, Claire, but character? That lingers." The silence that followed was heavy, awkward. For the first time, David didn't rush to defend her. He just stared at me, troubled. A fissure had appeared. A week later, the real explosion came. Claire had been planning an engagement celebration, a lavish dinner at a high-end French restaurant downtown. She insisted on inviting her friends, colleagues, and even her parents. I was included, though I suspected only for show. The room glittered with crystal chandeliers and expensive wine. Laughter floated through the air like perfume. I sat quietly, observing. Halfway through the evening, one of her friends, a smug banker with too much hair gel, raised a toast. "To Claire and David, may your love be as eternal as your beauty." Everyone clapped. Claire beamed, soaking up the adoration. Then, with wine on her lips and arrogance swelling, she turned to me. "You know," she said loudly, "when I first met David's mother, I thought she was the maid, truly. The way she dresses, the way she carries herself, so plain, so provincial." The table erupted in uncomfortable laughter. Not genuine laughter, but the kind that hides behind napkins. David's face drained of color. His hand clenched around his glass. "Claire, that's enough." But she wasn't finished. "No, really," she insisted, her accent thickening with drink. "I told my friends, if I marry David, at least his mother won't outshine me." This time, no one laughed. The silence was deafening. Even her own parents looked horrified. I set my glass down gently. My voice was calm, deliberate. "Interesting, Claire, because when I first met you, I thought you were kind, but I see now you're just clever at hiding your teeth." Her jaw dropped. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "Mom, I didn't know she spoke to you like this. I'm so sorry." I placed a hand on his arm. "Don't apologize for someone else's cruelty, son. Just see it." And in that moment, he did. The rope had tightened, the mask shattered. The aftermath came swiftly. The next morning, David arrived at my house with dark circles under his eyes. He sat at the kitchen table, his hands trembling. She blamed me," he whispered. "She said I embarrassed her, that I should have defended her in front of her friends. She threw a glass against the wall." I listened quietly. "He's not who I thought he was," he said finally. His voice broke on the words. "I feel like I've been living with a stranger." I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Love is blind, David, but blindness doesn't last forever." He buried his face in his palms. "What do I do?" I exhaled slowly. "You already know the answer. You just need to be brave enough to take it." Days passed, and cracks turned into chasms. Claire shouted at him in public, criticized his career, even mocked him in front of mutual friends. The whispers began to spread. People saw her cruelty, her arrogance. Her polished mask was no longer believable. One evening, she stormed into my home uninvited. Her eyes were wild, her perfume sharp like poison. "You," she hissed, pointing a finger at me, "you've turned him against me." I stayed seated, unflinching. "No, Claire, you've done that all on your own." She laughed bitterly. "You think you've won? I'll marry him anyway, and when I do, half of everything will be mine, including this house." I stood then, calm and deliberate. From the drawer beside me, I pulled a folder. I opened it slowly, sliding the papers onto the table. "Not this house," I said evenly. Not my accounts, not a single penny. It's all locked in trust. Ironclad. You could marry 1,000 Davids, and you'd still walk away with nothing. Her face paled. She snatched up the papers, scanning them, her hands shaking. Rage flickered in her eyes. You, she sputtered. Me, I said firmly. I protected what matters. You mistook silence for weakness, Claire. But silence is simply the sound of preparation. She slammed the papers down and stormed out, the door rattling in her wake. That night, David came over again. His voice was heavy, resigned. She's gone. She left after another fight, said she doesn't want to waste her youth on someone who can't keep up with her ambitions. He looked broken, but also relieved. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, tears in his eyes. You were right. I just didn't want to see it. I held him, brushing his hair like I had when he was a child. We all learn, David. Some lessons just cost more than others. What Claire never realized was that revenge didn't require me to destroy her. All I had to do was let her destroy herself. And she did, publicly, spectacularly, and irreversibly. Her mask was shattered, her empire of arrogance crumbled, and all that remained was the truth, ugly, undeniable, and hers to bear. After Claire stormed out, slamming the door like a spoiled child, the house was still, too still. My son David sat across from me, staring at the grain of the kitchen table as if it might hold the answers he needed. His eyes were red, his voice cracked when he finally spoke. She's gone, Mom. The words sounded like both relief and grief tangled into one. She packed her bags, called me pathetic, and left. She said I'd never be enough for her. I leaned back, my heart aching for him. Not because she left. Truthfully, that was a blessing. But because he had poured so much of himself into someone who only saw him as a stepping stone. I reached for his hand. David, sometimes life clears the poison for you. It hurts, yes, but that's how wounds heal. The body rejects what harms it. He squeezed my hand, tears rolling down his cheeks. For the first time in months, maybe years, I saw my son again. Not the man twisted into knots by Claire's manipulations, but the boy I raised, the man I knew he could be. The weeks that followed were quiet. David took time off work, stayed with me for a while, and slowly began to reclaim himself. At night, over steaming bowls of soup, he confessed the truth I already knew. He made me feel small, he admitted, like I wasn't enough, like no matter what I did, it would never satisfy her. That's not love, David, I said gently. Love is someone who makes you feel more, someone who lifts you, not breaks you. He nodded, eyes distant. I was blind. I wanted her so badly. I ignored the signs, the comments, the way she treated you. I should have listened. No, I corrected softly. You shouldn't have listened. You should have seen. And now you have. Word spread quickly. Claire's venomous behavior at the engagement dinner became the talk of her circle. Her parents were embarrassed. Her colleagues whispered behind her back, and her once carefully curated image of elegance cracked. I didn't lift a finger. I didn't need to. Claire had exposed herself, and the world took note. One evening, my phone buzzed with a message from a mutual acquaintance. A simple sentence that made me smile. She's lost her shine. People are finally seeing who she really is. David, meanwhile, grew stronger. Slowly, he rediscovered his laughter. He started jogging again, cooking meals, even meeting friends he'd neglected during his relationship. And then, one quiet night, as we sat watching the fire crackle, he turned to me. "Mom," he said, his voice steady, "thank you for staying patient, for letting me figure it out even when it hurt you." I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead like I had when he was a boy. "That's what mothers do, David. We wait, we watch, and when the time comes, we help you stand." Months later, David met someone new. Not flashy, not manipulative, just kind. A woman with laughter in her eyes and respect in her voice. When I first met her, she brought a pie she'd baked herself, and she spoke to me as though I mattered, as though I wasn't a hurdle to overcome, but a family to embrace. And for the first time, I saw hope in my son's face again. As for Claire, well, I heard rumors. She tried to latch on to another wealthy man, but her reputation preceded her. The whispers of arrogance, the stories of cruelty, followed her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. The girl who once looked down on me for being too plain now found doors closing on her, one after another. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't need to, because the greatest revenge isn't public humiliation or even payback. It's peace. Peace she could never have.
Life has a way of revealing people's true colors, even when we try to hide them behind charm and smiles. My silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. I didn't need to fight, because truth always finds a way to shine through. So remember this, the people who look down on you will eventually trip over their own arrogance. You just have to stand tall, stay patient, and let time do its work. And if you've ever had someone underestimate you, tell me your story in the comments. I want to hear it. If you found this story powerful, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss the next tale of karma, justice, and sweet, silent revenge. Because sometimes the quietest victories are the loudest of all.